Hello and welcome modular friends to another video. Today I would like to talk about practice. Practice makes perfect, they say. Practice makes perfect. Practice. So if you are learning a traditional instrument, I don't know, piano, guitar, whatever, the idea of practicing your instrument is, well, it's fairly well accepted, I would say, and you probably imagine that practice of those instruments would involve learning scales and exercises, learning songs or pieces of music. And that is kind of the accepted way of learning an instrument and getting better at it and so on. However, a modular synth is not like those other instruments. We probably don't sit there playing up and down scales and those kind of exercises. We certainly don't learn songs. Maybe you do, I don't know. So what can you practice in order to get better, or how can you practice? Should you be practicing with a modular synth in the same way that you would practice with a more traditional instrument? I guess the difference with a modular synth is that it's not like a traditional instrument. It is an instrument, but it's also a process. You might consider it, you know, in some ways it's like its own little studio. It's a way of thinking, it's a mindset, it's a system. And a lot of the time you are not acting in the same way as a normal instrumentalist, but you're acting sort of like a composer or a maybe even a conductor. Conducting a little electronic orchestra, but there is a way to practice, okay, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. Now at the start there I said practice makes perfect, and of course that is the classic phrase, but I don't think perfection is something that we're looking for with modular synthesis. I think really it is a case of, you know, more of a sort of habitual exploration of the system and the processes and so on to try and develop some sort of creative fluency. Okay, but before we get too far into this video, I would just like to invite you as ever to hit that subscribe button if you are someone who watches these videos regularly and you're not already subscribed. And if you're new to the channel and you're new to these videos, then thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully you will enjoy this video, and if so, then please do hit the like button and the subscribe button. It does help the channel, and it helps me to know that people out there are enjoying the videos and enjoying what I'm doing here. So thank you very much for participating, thank you very much for viewing, but without further ado, let's get back to it. So before we start thinking about any sort of specific modular synth practices or techniques or anything like that, I think it's worth just to talk about practice in the first place. I'm sure that many of you who play or use a modular synth probably came from another instrument. Your musical adventures probably started with another instrument, maybe many years before you came to modular synth. That is at least the case for me. It might not be the case for everyone, but I think a lot of people it probably is. And so the idea of practice is probably something that's not unfamiliar to you. Now the main thing about practice, I guess, is that it has to be consistent. There has to be a consistency to it. And it's something that you're going to aim to try and do regularly. That might be every day, it might be every other day. It doesn't really matter. Obviously, the more time you put into something, the better you get at it and the quicker you get better at it. But the importance is to do something regularly. And this does rely on building a habit. Okay? So a lot of what I'm going to say now is based on my experience as a music teacher and as a guitar teacher for, I don't know, more than 25 years, I guess, and teaching many different types of people from different walks of life, whether that be very young children or older people, adults, older children, people who were very serious about pursuing music, and people who were just interested in having something to do for a bit of a hobby. It doesn't really matter what the reasons are, what the background is, what the age of the person. Practice is still essential. And one of the things that I would always say to my students is it's important to try and develop a habit. And the way that you can do that is to try and make the practice as easy as possible. So it doesn't need to be a commitment of, 4 hours a night or anything like that. You might get to that eventually, but in the beginning, it probably needs to be a short amount of time, which allows you to sort of easily get into the practice and then do it, and then feel the success of completing a practice session quite easily, and then move on with the rest of your day or the rest of your evening or whatever. If it's easy to initiate practicing, you're more likely to do it. If it's difficult, then the chances are that you'll find a reason not to practice and you'll do something else instead. As humans, we don't like change a lot of the time. So we have our established routines, our daily lives that are built on routine. Get up in the morning, have a wash, whatever, have your breakfast, go to work, do your day at work, come home, walk the dog, have your tea, whatever your routine is. Might not be as mundane as mine, but we have these established patterns and routines, and our mind doesn't like it when those patterns are altered. Unless, of course, something like going on holiday or something like that. But if you're trying to insert something new into the routine, our mind will fight that, and it will fight that as earnestly as it can to try and maintain the existing routine. So if we want to try and insert some sort of practice into our daily routine, it's very difficult to do, and we have to try and sort of sneak it in there to a certain extent. So I always used to say to my guitar students, just commit to just a few minutes each day. Don't aim to do like an hour a day in the beginning, because you might manage that for the first couple of days, but then your mind will say, hang about a second, what's going on here? This is not part of our routine. We're not doing this, and you'll just give up. So if you can make it easy and just sort of set yourself a few minutes a day to start off with, maybe attaching that to some other activity. So for example, after I've had my evening meal, I'm going to spend 5 minutes practicing the guitar, or whatever it may be, because that way your evening meal may fluctuate in terms of the time, but that's something that's already a set routine, it's already a set habit. And so all we're doing is we're just attaching this new habit to something that already is habitual, and it makes it a little bit easier to do that. Okay, so if you are somebody who is looking to try and practice with your modular synth, and we'll talk about what you can practice later on, but if you're somebody who's trying to practice with your modular synth and you don't always, it's always difficult to find time to do this, try this technique. So try and just keep it to a short amount of time that you're going to commit to, and try and do that thing after something else that is already part of your daily routine. That way, if you can get that habit going and stick to it, the chances are that it will form a new habit, and before long you will be practicing daily without a second thought. Now I say before long, but how long does it take for a new habit to form? There has been research done on this, and I can go into more detail on that if anyone's interested, but it generally, there's a lot of myths that float around about it takes 21 days or something like that. But actually it's a bit longer. It takes about 3 months to form a new habit. So that's 3 months of doing the same thing consistently over and over before that thing becomes habitual. Okay, if you do it for a month and then think, well, you know, that's going to form the habit, it probably won't. Yeah, so it needs to be, you know, quite a length of time where you are exercising your willpower and you are making yourself do this thing that you won't want to do sometimes for about 3 months. And after that point, it's not like a switch is flicked and then all of a sudden you're habitually practicing. It's just that it starts to get easier at that point. And before long, you are practicing and it is part of your routine. It's something that you do. You don't necessarily have that that nagging thing that's trying to stop you from doing it. But yeah, it takes a while. Okay. What you can't do is you can't rely on willpower forever. Even the greatest athletes, the greatest musicians in the world, they don't rely on willpower to sustain their practice. They are practicing regularly because they've built a habit, and that is the most important thing. Okay, so I think I've kind of rambled on about that for long enough. So habit, very important. It's quite important as well with modular synth practice. I've discussed this in other videos. Is to keep some kind of journal, some kind of log of what you're doing, some sort of reflective practice journal. Now I'm not going to go into that now because I've got another video which explains that, and I'll probably put a link to that somewhere over there. So check that video out if you want to know more about how to use a practice journal or a reflective journal with your patches. So that brings us to what sort of things could you practice during a session? Well, the first thing probably to say is that some sessions you might want to be structured and have very specific things that you're trying to do, and other sessions you might want them to be a little bit more unstructured and a bit more sort of exploratory, where you're just kind of freely exploring your synth and playing and patching and seeing what comes up. Both of those different types of sessions will be useful to you because you'll discover things through exploration that you wouldn't have thought to investigate if you were planning out a structured patching session. So free exploration is very important for both composition and also just kind of getting to know your synth and your modules. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'm going to think a little bit more about what kind of sort of structured things you could do during a practice session. And again, I'm kind of sort of basing this a little bit, although it's not quite the same thing. I'm basing this a little bit on thinking about how you might approach practice as an instrumentalist, you know, someone playing guitar or piano or whatever. So of course, you know, one of the things that is really key if you are learning to play the guitar is that you are learning songs and you're practicing songs, or if it's more of a classical route, then you're learning pieces of music. Same for piano, any instrument really, because at the end of the day, music is not about learning scales and exercises and so on, it's about the music. So one of the main tools that we have for learning instruments is learning songs that have already been written, pieces of music that have already been written. Now, for modular synth, it's not quite the same because you're highly unlikely that you're going to try and recreate another piece of music by somebody else using a modular synth. For one, you probably don't have the same modules. It's very, very surprising if somebody's got exactly the same modules as somebody else. So you can't really create something exactly the same. And you know, what would be the benefit of it? There probably would be some benefit of it. And you know, having said that, I have tried to recreate patches when I was first learning modular using VCV, because I would follow tutorials on YouTube, especially Omri Cohen's channel, And actually I learnt quite a lot from just watching those videos, pausing and patching and pausing and patching and so on. So it is useful, but I would say it's only useful so far. And once you get to a certain stage, you're probably going to be thinking more about creating your own patches rather than trying to copy patches that already exist. But there is kind of an equivalent to that, and I would say that is sound design and trying to recreate sounds that you hear. So quite often as a guitarist or any instrumentalist, you will try and work out music by ear. You will listen to the song and you'll try and work out what the chords are or what the melody is, and try and play that by ear rather than reading music. So the equivalent of that, I think, in modular synths would be trying to sort of work out sounds. So if you hear a particular sound in a piece of music, and then go away and try and actually work out what is going on in that sound and see if you can recreate that sound. Now the chances are that you're not going to be able to recreate that sound exactly, because again, you haven't got the same modules, most likely, that the person had when they made that sound in the first place. So you're going to have to sort of compromise, and you might get close to the sound, but it doesn't really matter whether you do or you don't, because ultimately the experience of listening to the sound, trying to work out what's going on in that sound, and then trying to recreate it with your own setup is going to be a beneficial process, and you're going to learn a lot about your modules and a lot about the synth and a lot about sound by just going through that process. And of course, you don't have to just try and recreate sounds from other pieces of music. You can try and recreate sounds from the world around you. Maybe, natural sounds that you hear. Classic examples would be to try and create the sound of ocean waves or the sound of wind, the sound of a car engine. All of these things are possible to recreate within your modular synth. And again, it comes down to listening to these sounds and spending time listening to your environment and to try and hear what is going on in those sounds, what sort of movement there is, what possible source could you use for the sounds. So if you were to do this, first of all, you need to listen to the sounds, but then I would try to imagine those sounds in my head first and imagine what is going on and what modules are going to work to try and recreate those sounds before going anywhere near the synth. Try and hear it in my head and try and figure out what are you actually going to do. First of all, what modules you're going to use, what processing, what modulation, what sound sources, and then once you've kind of worked out those components, then go to the synth and start patching, trying to recreate again the sound that you hear in your head. And it's probably a bit of a, it's an iterative thing where you're going to create a sound, and then you're going to listen to it, and then you're going to sort of, reflect on it, make some changes, listen to it again, reflect on it, make some changes, and eventually you might get somewhere close to the original sound that you were trying to make. Of course, you might not get anywhere close to it at all, but that doesn't really matter, because even if you don't manage to replicate the sound that you're trying to hear, you'll still learn a lot about your synth, and you might even discover some interesting new sounds that you can use in patches in the future. So even if you don't manage to create that sound, it doesn't matter too much. And I like to think of this process of exploring sound, whether you're trying to recreate a sound or whether you're trying to come up with something new. I like to think of this explorative process as kind of like a little puzzle, and this is part of what I would think of as kind of like the joy of modular synth, or the joy of patching, where you have these little sound puzzles that you're trying to solve, and there might be a particular sound in your head that you're trying to create, and by sort of analyzing that sound and then starting to think about what modules you'll need to create that sound, you're starting to solve a little puzzle. And your initial solution to that puzzle might not quite fit with what's in your mind, but as you work on it more and more, the puzzle gets closer and closer to being solved. And this can be quite a sort of, I don't know, a meditative process, I guess, where you're, you can very easily get lost in the process, and it can be quite calming and relaxing and enjoyable. And I think this is probably one of the reasons that people enjoy modular synth so much in the first place, is not necessarily because of the final output, but actually this process of working on little sound puzzles. And ultimately this is far more interesting and enjoyable, and probably beneficial for your own development than than just sort of scrolling through presets on a screen or on the computer, trying to find a sound that's already been made that fits with what you're trying to do. If you can sort of, get into the habit of creating your own sounds, it's much better. It's much better for you. And of course, you won't always create the sound that you were intending to create. It might be a lot of times that you won't do that. And so you have to kind of learn to embrace this idea of non-perfection. So, at the start of the video, I was talking about practice makes perfect. And I think with modular synth, we're not aiming for perfection at all. Really, that imagined idea is just a starting point. For exploration, and the beauty of the modular synth is that it allows you to explore and come up with things that you wouldn't necessarily think of initially, and you wouldn't even plan or intend to do. So really, every failure is actually just an undiscovered success. And so, it allows you to kind of embrace that, that philosophy a little bit. And maybe that's something that we can sort of, it'd be good to sort of take that forward into life in general, really, that failures aren't failures at all. Failures are just a different kind of success that we didn't really know we were looking for. Anyway, yes. A little bit philosophical there. Other approaches that you might use when practicing modular synth. So you might focus on a single module and try and learn as much about that module as possible. And by that, I don't mean just using a single module in a patch, but I mean that module is the main thing that you're trying to work with, and you're trying to understand the modes, you're trying to understand what different controls do, and as much as you can about that module and how it interacts with other modules that you're probably already familiar with. If there's any sort of, almost like hidden functions that are in there that you can sort of tweak out, but really kind of doing an in-depth study of that particular module, whatever you choose. I've talked about sort of simple creating simple patches before, as another video where I talk about that. So yeah, sort of limiting your module choice and just creating very simple patches. That could be something that you focus on in a particular session. And of course, the idea there being that limitation and constraint can lead to higher levels of creativity as we're forced to think outside the box and work within these limitations. You might also want to try, on some days you might want to try working on sort of generative ideas and ways that you can make or techniques for making a generative patch interesting and not just the same thing looping over time. And then other days you might want to work on techniques for more kind of like non-generative patches where you're actually composing something which has a structure to it, and look at the sort of intentional techniques and structures that you can use in future compositions. Of course, as with any instrument, you probably want to practice performing. If you are somebody who is interested in performance and you're playing gigs or you're hoping to play gigs, then you need to practice performing those patches or pieces or whatever it is. It's not just a case of turning up to a gig and opening your case and just away you go. You know, there are things that you can practice, so you need to know, especially, you know, it can be stressful sometimes in a gig if you can't always hear properly what's going on. Maybe it's not lit very well. There's a sort of the adrenaline, the pressure of the situation, and so on. So you need to be confident that, you know, when you reach for a particular module, that you know what dials you're turning, what sliders you're pushing, what buttons you're pushing. If you need to repatch, that you know you're repatching into the right inputs and outputs, and that's something that you can practice. So, you know, you can practice that live set over and over again, knowing that when you actually come to do the performance, it's going to be slick. It's gonna be for the amount of time that you're meant to play for, and it's gonna work, and it's gonna, you know, it will fill you with confidence that hopefully means you will enjoy the performance more so than it just being a stressful situation. So those are a few ideas for things that you could practice. I mean, I'm sure there are many more things that you could practice with your synth, and if you are somebody that is practicing regularly and you have specific things that you try and practice, then please let us know in the comments. And hopefully you can see that having some kind of intentional practice with your synth is beneficial, that, you know, over time it leads to less confusion, less kind of time wasting, and ultimately more music. You get a deeper understanding of your system, and you can create music quicker and more efficiently and more creatively. Hopefully it develops higher levels of confidence with your music and higher levels of confidence with your performance, and maybe even higher levels of confidence to experiment more and to be more creative. So hopefully you can see that you know, having some kind of structured practice routine is beneficial, and, you know, I've given you a few ideas there of ways that you could start doing that. But just remember, in the beginning, take it easy. Just try and keep your practice simple. Little and often is the key, and then over time you can increase your practice sessions until you're practicing for longer. So maybe if you want to try one of these methods in your own studio, at home, wherever, and let me know how you get on in the comments. That would be great. If you have, you know, particular methods that you use, then let us know in the comments, and then other people can try those out as well. I think just to remember, it's not always about getting it right. It's not about perfection. It's about discovery and experimentation, and making music and having fun in the process. Okay, I think that is all I want to say for this video. So if you have enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments, and if you want to see more of these videos, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. Cheerio, bye bye.